Today I will pass down to you the objective truth about which Dragon Quest games you are allowed to enjoy. 3 takes the number 10 spot. That is because it very recently got remade, and that remake, while not perfect, is overall a big improvement over the Super Famicom version, which was the previous definitive way of playing it. But the newest remake being the best version doesn't mean that the Super Famicom version has absolutely no merit. Especially if you either have some historic curiosity or if you just like to see a physical damage dealer put out respectable numbers. In those cases that version still exists, and if there's anything you take away from this video, it should be that these versions are still different experiences, and if you haven't played either, then you should check out the one that you're missing out on. For example, when looking at the gameplay, a big aspect of that is party building, and the balancing is so different between the versions that playing the remake and messing around with party compositions felt like playing Dragon Quest III for the first time, and that should hold true vice versa. Whichever version you end up playing though, these aspects make it so that this game feels like you're making it your own adventure. Yes, spin-offs are included here. This means not all mainline games will be on this list, but I'll also rank them separately at the end if you're interested. At any rate, Tagged was the one that I was the most split on. Gachas are awful inherently, and if there's anything you take away from this video, it should be that gachas are bad. And I'll be honest, Tagged wasn't a good game. So why is it on this list? It had its moments and so much potential. If it just hadn't been a gacha. Let's not talk about Dragon Quest Wars for a second, but imagine an actually fleshed out Dragon Quest Monsters meets Fire Emblem type of game. You know, with scouting instead of gacha pulls to get new monsters. And to its merit, the free-to-play experience was pretty decent. There was basically always a way to use strategy to get past anything the game threw at you, which is one of the quintessential aspects of any good Dragon Quest game to me. If you replace grinding with gambling, of course. And while during the time I played, I never spent a cent on the game, because I'd rather die than support a gacha financially. And while I wouldn't have indirectly recommended it like this before the game was discontinued, nowadays I can look back on it and say that I had a good time. I don't love playing 7 so much that I'd put it at number 8, but making Dragon Quest 7 content that I know nobody cares about is a guilty pleasure and bad habit of mine. There's just so much to talk about, the game's story is so incredibly dense. It says so much with so little, and it does so repeatedly for 100 hours. It's my favorite Dragon Quest game to think and write about. That being said, this doesn't translate to moment enjoyment while playing. If you slogged through the game before and didn't enjoy it because of the pacing, then there is only one thing you should take away from this video. Try playing the game again, but don't approach it with a goal-oriented mindset. Don't try to simply get through and tick a game off your bucket list. And try to let every event sink in. Think about what's happening, and if you don't feel like it, then don't finish the game either. Every other game is also much more fun if you don't approach them with that wanting to have played it mentality. But I believe that thanks to the super slow pacing, Dragon Quest 7 suffers the most from it. This is the only shared spot, but it's because the first 2 Sly Mori games are virtually the same. There are less differences between these two than between any other version of Dragon Quest III and the newest remake. The Sly Mori games are the simplest ones here, but simple in a good way. You play the game with only 2 buttons and a D-pad. Everything is designed so intuitively that you don't even need to understand the text in order to know exactly what to do. And it's simple fun to just move to slingshot your slime around, even if the games are not all that challenging. If there's one thing you take away from this video, it's that if you played Rocket Slime, you don't need to know Japanese to play Sly Mori on the Game Boy Advance. And if you enjoyed Rocket Slime, and let's be honest, if you played it and you enjoyed it, then I highly recommend checking it out. And if you haven't played Rocket Slime either, then go and play that one. I think it's impossible to dislike these games if you have a soul. People say other Dragon Quest games are the comfort games and they sit down and grind levels to relax, and I personally never felt that way. I find grinding more annoying than relaxing, but these games, they are the quintessential comfort games. If there's one thing you should take away from this video, it's that 5 is 100% absolutely, definitively, indisputably and by far one of the Dragon Quest games. It's the most dramatic, it has emotional high moments like no other, and overall the best main narrative out of all the Dragon Quest games. But this story lost its impact to me over time. Dragon Quest V is not as evergreen as games that don't put all their eggs in the main narrative basket. When compared to the upcoming games on this list, 5 really only has its main narrative going forward. And it is really good, but I already know it, so I don't find myself replaying it or enjoying those replays much. Though a few years back I would have probably put Dragon Quest V higher on this list. The different brides barely change anything, and while yes, technically monster taming exists, something that you'd expect to give it so much replay value, I think this first attempt at it wasn't good yet. Joker 1 is a game all about monster taming, and it's monster taming done right. You're able to recruit every single monster you see, and you see them on the overworld, which in turn entirely recontextualizes how you explore a new area. Instead of just looking for treasure and where to go, you're constantly on the lookout for possible additions to your party, funny looking monsters for the collection, or stepping stones that you can use for synthesis. And to recruit them you have a separate command, which takes a bit of strategy or party building to improve your odds. But either way, it's a much more conscious decision to recruit monsters. You don't just wander around hoping that the right monster appears in a random battle and then hope that you get the 1 out of 256 chance that it joins you. The actual game attached to the system isn't all that important, but it does its job. It's definitely designed with multiplayer in mind, as in the main game's main purpose is being your means of getting monsters. And then multiplayer is where you flex on your little brother with your overpowered team. But even so, I like the main game for its pacing. I like that one scene with Dr. Snapped in the desert, and Joker 1 is a game that you can easily finish in under 10 hours and with minimal grinding, if you so choose. But if there's one thing you take away from this video, it's probably going to be that I'm a huge sucker for that style of monster taming / scouting featured here. Joker 2 is just Joker 1 but longer. The main story is longer. Reaching the first slime in Joker 2 takes you half an hour. You use a lot of the same monsters, except they're longer. And the grind for the best monsters is way longer. It has more quality of life, just more options, and it's an upgrade over Joker 1 in many ways. The multiplayer sadly got really degenerate. But even that is better than how it was in Joker 1. There's this ability called Double Up that does double damage but lowers your defense to 0 afterwards as a trade-off. And that sounds fair, but in order to make sure the other player gets that extra damage, they gave that move turn priority, so when you use it, it will always happen before anything else. There's a trait that makes you go first, early bird, but even with that, you go after double up. If you defend, you will only defend after double up. The same goes for selflessness, an ability that lets you tank hits for other party members for the turn. And under normal circumstances, that attack is capped out at 200 damage. If you could one-shot someone's monsters before they ever got to act, that would be pretty gross. It's only too bad that there's a trait called Hit Squad, or later Flurry, that splits a monster's physical attacks into multiple smaller ones. And with that trait, each individual hit has a cap of 200 damage. Especially the Conclave XY was used a lot for this unreasonably oppressive strategy. If it isn't painfully clear, I grew up playing the first 2 Joker games, so I'm very biased towards them. Objectively, Dragon Quest Monsters 1 and 2 on the 3DS are better games. But I am not ranking objective quality, just my favorite games. A fun thing to do for Joker 1 and 2, but the same goes for all the other monster games, is to play those games alongside someone else and to play PvP at set intervals. If there's one thing you take away from this video, it should be to grab a friend of yours and to experience the games that way. And if you do that for this game, just spam level up. This unhealthy meta and the pacing are why I find Joker 1 and Joker 2 almost interchangeable. But if they're so similar, why didn't I group them together like I did for the number 7 spot? "11 has the best combat out of all the mainline games. It's the most expressive, it has one of the more interesting main parties, and while it's super linear, that linearity results in it having the best pacing in the series. Draconian quests combined with the almost sandboxy combat that you can exploit in so many ways, where you can come up with a silly restriction like setting every party member's HP to 1 and still being able to complete the game. That combined with the pacing, meaning you can hop from one battle to the next without random encounters or any other speed bumps, makes this game so fun to play around with. Dragon Quest games always allow for many different playstyles. You can grind as much or as little as you want, for example. And Dragon Quest 11 takes this to an extreme. I highly value that on a replay you can barrel through, have the combat be super engaging and not bother with anything else. But equally, you can always take your time, do every side quest, fight every random battle and explore every town to its fullest, and you'll be rewarded for it. This amount of choice that Dragon Quest games give you is one of my favorite aspects. The games are only ever as hard as you want them to be. If there's one thing you should take away from this video, it's to give replaying Dragon Quest 11 a try, while not going out of your way to fight anything besides the bosses. You can add either Draconian quests, except to reduce the XP one, that one is balanced badly, or you can make up your own restrictions. It opens up a whole new dimension of enjoyment for this game. "8 was the first game I played, and it's the first Dragon Quest that came out in Europe, so needless to say I'm heavily biased towards it. Dragon Quest 8 is a character-driven RPG focusing, well no, the focus is actually on the world and not the characters, something that becomes much more apparent when considering the Japanese title. And this is my favorite aspect. When walking around the overworld map, there are so-called notorious monsters. Each are named mini-boss that you can fight, and if you beat it, you can recruit it to your monster team. This makes exploration so fun. More fun than in any other mainline Dragon Quest game. And there's a lot to explore. It's such a large and open world where every stretch of land, every island, might just house treasure, points of interest, and more important than that, notorious monsters. And while the combat has the tension system, overall better combat in 1 through 7, and while the story is more than alright, this being a game where the simple act of traveling around a mostly empty overworld is disengaging is what elevates it all the way up here. Before the number 1 spot, I still have a couple of honorable mentions. Terry's Wonderland and Ivo and Luca aren't on this list because I get my fix from the Joker games. Dragon Quest 9 and Builders barely didn't make it on here, and I only played version 1 of Dragon Quest 10, so I don't have the full picture on that one. Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 3 is my favorite game. It has the best multiplayer experience out of all the Dragon Quest games, and said multiplayer experience is the best Dragon Quest experience. It's the perfected version of Joker 1 and 2, at least for Dragon Quest fans. Joker 3 is the highest density of fan service possible. It starts with additions like being able to ride on top of each of your monsters. There's so much inherent excitement in being able to ride your favorite Dragon Quest monsters. But beyond that, monster riding and the verticality it allows for enable the best level design in the series. Each area is so dense, so expressive, with monsters living their lives and Easter eggs sprinkled throughout. And I can't stress this enough, every monster is meaningful. The game doesn't just have many options, but it has many viable options. With the way traits and ranks work in this game, any monster has a very similar set of max stats and ability to hold the same amount of traits overall. The difference between a red and a green crab is no longer that one is stronger. Now the difference comes from the base trait as well as the distribution of stats. All crabs have their merits, and if reaching max stats sounds like a pipe dream, I have good news. Joker 3 removed the feature of grinding. Getting a monster you just scouted to max rank and max level takes just a couple of minutes. This is in large part to the disc system, but if I explain rainbow fondues and discs, then people will get suspicious of the video's runtime, and they will realize that the whole point of it is to ramble about how much I love this game. Quality of life is the name of the game, and I like my life good. There are inbuilt guides that give you basically all information you could ever need. You can fine-tune how the monster AI works for each individual monster, which doesn't seem impactful until you consider that monsters with the traits that make them act multiple times only follow your order for the first action. So you can make a monster that uses Strip, a spell that lowers status resistances, and then goes on to cast status effects. And to top it off, the monsters are smart enough to attack weaknesses. There's basically always a way to get a monster to do exactly what you want it to do. And thanks to how freeform traits are, given how only one slot for each monster is fixed, you can make your monsters do a lot of stuff. Do you want a Crabbit that has inherent bounce and bar bounce, meaning it reflects physical as well as magical attacks? Getting it from scratch only takes a few minutes. And the fact that you can get it so quickly means that the game can actually be balanced around that. The story mode includes a few boss fights that are so hard that they justify you making new monsters to specifically beat those bosses. You know, instead of just brute forcing your way through with the guys you already have. And to me, that is peak gameplay. Having to think about the hurdle and then making your own solution, which only takes a few minutes. It's not really difficult to come up with a combination of monsters that beats whatever obstacle is in your way, and again, getting them and even getting them up to snuff is effortless. But this process sparks some creative thinking in the player, and the single player gameplay loop already primes you for the right mindset going into multiplayer. And for that, I just want to give you one example of a party. I had this team that tried to always go first with the whole team, all having the early bird plus trait and being the highest agility monsters. And agility gives you a fixed turn order. There's no randomness there. So I would have the one of the four that goes last use an ability that ends the turn called Showstopper. The idea was to go first and then end the turn before any enemy ever got to act. And that sounds super degenerate, right? If you don't have priority moves or early bird plus, you'll simply never be able to act. But the team I described right now was terrible. There's an ability that instantly kills any monster that attempts to use an ability like Showstopper. So if you're reliant on any of those gimmick moves and your opponent predicts it, you will be harshly punished. And then there are multiple traits that try to inflict stasis to enemies at the start of the turn. And monsters with early bird plus are cripplingly weak to stasis. In other words, they just die to those traits. And of course, this game has a lot more priority moves, like Double Up, which is back and almost as strong as it was in Joker 2. Except here, the whole environment changed to make Double Up just one more okay option instead of game defining. Just from knowing about other traits like Metal Body, which is exactly what it sounds like, you can probably picture just how dynamic a metagame with counters to each countermeasure this is. That being said, there are still two versions of this game, Vanilla and Pro, and for Joker 3 Pro especially, you might need some homebrew rules to make it fun. For one, seeds exist and allow monsters to go a little above their max stats. It still wouldn't be an awful amount of grinding to max out your stats with seeds, but of course it's not comparable to only taking a few minutes. So just disallow stat increasing seeds. It's easy enough to check if a monster used any. And I also recommend that you ban White Fusion. It's a feature that's sort of like Double Up in Joker 2, in the way that it's such an oppressive strategy that it ends up making less avenues of party building viable. On that topic, you can play with 4 or 8 monsters. And if you play with 8, which was my favorite way of playing, then I recommend allowing both players to swap out party members once per turn. But limit it once per turn. There's more I could say, like how you don't need a time limit if you're playing with someone in the same room, but I'm getting off track. Joker 3's vanilla version is better than Pro in some ways, but not overall. The White Fusion and the Notch Row are garbage, and the main game balancing is worse. So what I recommend you do is to play Joker 3 vanilla and then switch over to Joker 3 Pro, which even allows you to skip the whole main game. It literally gives you a skip button, I'm not joking. You can upgrade to the Pro version without losing anything in transition, so I recommend playing vanilla first so that you don't lose out on the experience of playing the main game. And get someone else involved. There's no point in making your own teams if you don't use them to crush someone else's. And if there's no point in making teams, then there's no point in playing the game past its bare minimum. Except being showered with fan service. And on the topic, I promise to rank the mainline games at the end. Here you go, don't spend it all in one place and have a good one.